Living out in rural Texas, I always believed in the value of simplicity. My land, a sprawling 50-acre property, had been passed down through my family for generations. At its heart lay a shimmering lake that reflected the endless blue skies and rolling clouds. This lake wasn't just a body of water to me, it was the soul of my land, a haven for my thoughts, and the perfect spot for casting a line after a long day. For years I lived peacefully with no complaints. Then the HOA showed up. I wasn't even part of their jurisdiction. My property was miles outside their boundaries. But that didn't stop their self-appointed president, Karen Swenson, from finding ways to incorporate my land into their master plan. It started small, pamphlets in the mailbox, notices about beautification initiatives. I ignored them. Karen's persistence, however, was legendary. One morning, while enjoying the quiet with my fishing rod and a cooler of lemonade, a khaki-clad HOA representative strolled right up to my dock. "You're in violation," he declared, clipboard clutched like a badge of honor. "Violation of what?" I asked, leaning back and pulling my hat lower to shield my eyes. "Fishing without HOA approval. It's a $500 fine." I laughed, thinking it was a joke. "You're kidding, right? This is my lake. The lake falls under HOA water use policies now. Didn't you read the letter?" "What letter?" "The one we sent last month. Effective immediately, all bodies of water within HOA influence are subject to community access rules." I stared at him, trying to process the absurdity. "First of all, your HOA doesn't influence me. Second, this lake is private property registered in my name. And third, you can take your fine and shove it." Apparently they didn't see the humor. The fine arrived in my mailbox 2 days later, along with a notice about escalation procedures, if I didn't pay. It wasn't about the money, it was about the principle. They had no right to dictate what I could or couldn't do on my own land. I called Karen directly. "What's this nonsense about fining me for fishing in my lake?" "It's not just your lake, Mr. Thompson. The HOA has determined that it's a shared resource for the neighborhood. Everyone should have the right to enjoy it." "That's rich. You mean your HOA decided to steal it?" "We're fostering community spirit. Now, if you pay the fine and register for an HOA fishing permit, we can resolve this amicably." "Amicably?" My voice rose. "Let me be clear, this lake isn't yours. It never will be." Karen's sigh was full of condescension. "Perhaps you should check the latest land use maps." "Good day, Mr. Thompson." The call ended, leaving me fuming. Checking the maps, as it turned out, was a sobering experience. Somehow, Karen and her cronies had maneuvered a sneaky rezoning deal with the county. On paper, the lake was now classified as a shared resource, granting HOA influence over its use. But what they hadn't realized was that I knew how to play this game too. It was time to fight back. "You said." The more I dug, the more I uncovered just how far Karen and her HOA minions had gone. Rezoning a private lake into a shared resource? That wasn't just overreach, it was a blatant power grab. Worse, it seemed deliberate. I spent a full evening sifting through old property records, legal documents, and county filings. The deed to my land, including the lake, was crystal clear. All 50 acres, including the water, belonged solely to me. Yet, the new county maps showed a change in designation, citing some obscure community enhancement ordinance. "That ordinance doesn't apply to unincorporated land," my lawyer, Nate, said after a quick call. "Looks like they played fast and loose with the zoning board. Can we fix it?" "Fix it? Sure. But it'll take time. You'll need to petition the county, challenge the HOA's claim, and present your deed." "How long are we talking?" "A few months at least. Maybe more if Karen decides to drag her feet." Karen dragging her feet? That wasn't just likely, it was guaranteed. I didn't have months to sit around while my property rights were trampled. So, while Nate started the legal work, I began plotting my own solution. The next morning, I drove into town to chat with Old Man Fletcher, the retired surveyor who'd mapped my property years ago. Fletcher was a gruff Texan with a knack for meticulous records. "Rezoned, you say?" Fletcher muttered, squinting at the map I'd brought him. "Yep." Somehow, the HOA managed to convince the county to redraw the lines. "Ridiculous." He tapped the map with a knobby finger. "This lake's been private for decades. See here? Boundary marker 42A. That's your line. They can't touch it. Think you can help prove it?" Fletcher leaned back, his chair creaking. "It'll cost you a case of that honey bourbon you brought last Christmas." Done. Over the next week, Fletcher and I retraced every inch of the property lines, documenting every boundary marker and recording GPS coordinates. Meanwhile, Nate filed a formal complaint with the county, demanding a review of the zoning changes. But Karen wasn't about to back down. The day Fletcher finished his report, another notice arrived in my mailbox, a cease and desist order for unauthorized use of shared community resources. "They're really trying to push you out," Nate said when I forwarded him the notice. "They probably want the lake for their HOA events. Fishing tournaments, maybe?" I'd seen Karen and her HOA cronies setting up chairs and picnic tables by the lake's edge, as though they already owned the place. It was infuriating. They weren't just stealing my lake, they were claiming my hard work and heritage. That's when I had an idea. If Karen thought she could strong-arm me, she was in for a rude awakening. I called Nate with a simple question: "How much would it cost to buy the lake outright?" "You already own it," he said, confused. "I mean as a separate legal entity. Just the lake itself." Nate paused and I could hear the gears turning. "That's actually brilliant. If we carve out the lake as its own property, you could put it in a trust or even restrict access entirely." "Exactly. Let's make it happen." While Nate worked out the legal details, I began planning my next move. Karen and her HOA had been treating my lake as their playground, but they were about to learn the hard way that you don't mess with a Texan and his water rights. By the time the lake was officially in its own trust, separate from the rest of my property, I had something even better in store: signs, fences, and a surprise that would leave the HOA reeling. By the time the lake's ownership papers were finalized, my plan was in full swing. It wasn't just about reclaiming my rights. It was about making Karen and her HOA minions regret every smug notice, every petty fine, and every self-serving ordinance they'd ever concocted. The first order of business was securing the lake. I ordered a set of heavy-duty "no trespassing" signs, complete with bold lettering that practically screamed, "Private property, trespassers will be prosecuted." These weren't the flimsy yard signs you'd find at the hardware store. No, these were industrial grade, designed to last through Texas storms and Karen's tantrums. Next, I had a fence contractor install a perimeter around the lake. It wasn't just any fence, it was an 8-foot-tall steel chain-link barrier topped with barbed wire. Overkill? Maybe. Satisfying? Absolutely. On the day the fencing crew arrived, I spotted Karen pacing along the lake's edge, her phone glued to her ear. I could almost hear the screech in her voice as she waved frantically, probably calling every HOA board member she could think of. The real cherry on top came later that evening when I installed motion-activated floodlights and cameras around the lake. Any trespassers would not only be caught on tape, they'd be lit up like deer in headlights. I wasn't taking any chances. If Karen wanted a fight, she was going to get one. While the fence was going up, I made a few discreet calls to the county sheriff's office. I explained the situation and shared all the documentation proving my ownership. The sheriff, a no-nonsense man named Buckley, was sympathetic. "Sounds like they've been overstepping their bounds for a while," he said. "You let me know if anyone tries to mess with your property and we'll take care of it." With Buckley on my side, I felt confident the HOA wouldn't dare push too far. But just in case, I had another ace up my sleeve: a water use restriction. Nate had outdone himself. By creating a separate trust for the lake, I was able to impose strict usage rules. I filed a formal notice with the county, declaring the lake off-limits to any non-authorized individuals. Fishing, boating, swimming, every activity Karen and her crew had planned was now legally prohibited. The next HOA event was scheduled for the weekend, and I knew they'd planned to use the lake as their centerpiece. On Saturday morning, I grabbed a lawn chair, a cooler of lemonade, and a good book, then parked myself on my dock to watch the show. Sure enough, Karen arrived with a caravan of HOA members, all armed with coolers, fishing poles, and inflatable rafts. They stopped short at the sight of the towering fence and the glaring signs. "What is this?" Karen demanded, marching up to the fence. She spotted me on the dock and screeched, "Mr. Thompson." "Good morning, Karen," I called, raising my glass of lemonade in a mock toast. "Nice day, isn't it?" "You can't do this. The lake is for the community." "Actually, it's not. As of last week, the lake is private property, legally owned and restricted by my trust. You're trespassing just by standing there." Karen's face turned beet red. "This isn't over. I'll have you fined for this." "Good luck with that." I waved the deed and trust papers in the air. "Everything's in order. But hey, feel free to call the sheriff if you'd like to confirm." As if on cue, a patrol car pulled up. Sheriff Buckley stepped out, tipping his hat. "Afternoon, folks. Problem here?" Karen sputtered, pointing at the fence. "He can't block us from the lake. It's a community resource." Buckley looked at me, then back at Karen. Ma'am, I've seen the paperwork. This lake is private property. I suggest you and your friends move along before things get unpleasant. Karen's group dispersed with grumbles and dirty looks, but I couldn't have cared less. As I watched them retreat, I felt the sweet satisfaction of justice. Still, I knew Karen wouldn't give up that easily. She had one last humiliation coming, and I couldn't wait to deliver it. You said. Karen's attempts to regain control didn't stop after the fence fiasco. Over the next week, I received a flurry of notices, emails, and even a strongly worded letter from the HOA's lawyer, demanding I dismantle the fence and restore community access. Each time I forwarded everything to Nate, who responded with the same 2 words, legally baseless. But Karen wasn't done scheming. Late one night I spotted headlights near the lake. Checking my cameras, I saw a group of people cutting through the fence. It didn't take a genius to figure out who'd orchestrated this little stunt. I called the sheriff immediately. On our way, Buckley said. As I watched the trespassers try to load a boat into the water, my floodlights flipped on, illuminating the entire scene like a Friday night football game. The look on their faces was priceless. Minutes later, Buckley and his deputies rolled in, catching Karen and a few of her cronies red-handed. This is private property, Buckley said, arms crossed. You're all under arrest for trespassing and vandalism. Karen shrieked, trying to argue, but the sheriff wasn't having it. She and her accomplices were hauled off, and I had more than enough evidence from the cameras to press charges. The next HOA meeting was one for the history books. Karen, now facing criminal charges, was voted out as president in spectacular fashion. The board issued a formal apology, but the damage to their reputation was done. Karen's ambitions had backfired spectacularly, and her once loyal supporters turned on her like vultures. While all this unfolded, I had one last card to play, a fitting end to their nonsense. Using the new trust, I turned the lake into an official wildlife conservation area. I worked with a local environmental nonprofit to stock the lake with fish, plant native grasses, and create habitats for migrating birds. It was a win-win. The land was protected, and the HOA would never have any claim to it again. I put up a new set of signs around the perimeter, this time with a slightly different tone. Private Wildlife Reserve. No fishing, boating, or trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. The neighborhood didn't dare challenge me after that. Karen moved out of town, her reputation in tatters, and the HOA retreated to licking its wounds. As for me, I got my peace back. My lake remained mine, untouchable and serene. Sometimes revenge isn't just about settling a score. It's about making sure the lesson sticks, and Karen got that lesson loud and clear. The end.